Hi, I'm David, and welcome back to COC. Today, we're going to continue our talk about saints every Christian should know. As I mentioned in the last video, saints are individuals who reached a profound level of sanctity during their lives and now dwell in the presence of God. Throughout church history, they have come from every walk of life. Men and women, young and old, rich and poor, emperors and empresses, kings and queens, masters and slaves, popes and patriarchs, bishops and martyrs, missionaries and monks, scholars and theologians. Some of them shaped the great doctrines of the faith. Some of them carried the gospel across oceans. Some of them comforted the afflicted during times of plague. And some of them lived hidden lives of prayer and service. In studying the lives of the saints, you and I are reminded of the universal call to holiness, that every Christian, no matter their state in life, is called to become a saint. So who are they? Who are some of the saints every Christian should know? Well, again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but here are some more of the most important ones. First on our list is St. John Paul II. St. John Paul was a pope of the Catholic Church who is often credited with helping end the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. He also brought a profound understanding of human dignity, promoted interfaith dialogue, and traveled widely. Some of his writings, including Love and Responsibility and Theology of the Body, offered a vision of marriage and sexuality rooted in God's perfect design. He also survived an assassination attempt. Next on our list is Saint Junipero Serra. Saint Junipero Serra was a Catholic friar who served as a missionary to Mexico and what is today California, where he founded 9 missions that eventually grew into major cities like San Diego and San Francisco. His legacy is a little complicated, but he tried to combine evangelization with teaching things like agriculture and education to indigenous peoples. And he did his best to defend the natives against exploitation by colonialists. Next on our list is St. Justin Martyr. St. Justin Martyr, as you might have guessed by his name, was martyred for the faith. He was initially a pagan philosopher, but later became a Christian and a staunch apologist. After he was arrested for being a Christian, he appeared in court and boldly proclaimed the gospel to the whole courtroom. He also had several important writings, including First Apology and Dialogue with Trypho, which explain the gospel's moral and rational foundations. And like I said, he was ultimately martyred for the faith. Next up is St. Kateri Tekakwitha. Nicknamed the Lily of the Mohawks, St. Kateri Tekakwitha was a Native American who had a very tragic early life. A smallpox epidemic swept through her village when she was young, and both of her parents and younger brother died. When she was 19, she became a Christian after listening to some Catholic missionaries who came to her area. She then took a vow of chastity and dedicated the rest of her life to prayer and fasting. Next on our list is St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence was a deacon in the early church and is remembered for his charity, courage, and wit. He was a treasurer and in charge of distributing alms to the poor. He was arrested for being a Christian and was ordered to hand the church's treasury over to the authorities. But instead, he showed the authorities people who were widows, orphans, sick, and disabled and said, "These are the true treasures of the church." The authorities weren't amused, so he was tortured by being burned alive on a gridiron. Now check this out. According to eyewitnesses, after being burned on one side for a while, he told his torturers, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." That was gutsy, but as you might have guessed, he ultimately died for the faith. Next on our list is St. Leo the Great. St. Leo I was a pope of the Catholic Church who faced several political and theological challenges during his pontificate. However, he is best known for convincing Attila the Hun not to attack Rome. Attila the Hun was the ruler of an empire that stretched across Central and Eastern Europe. He was nicknamed the Scourge of God, and in the year 452, he and his army were getting ready to invade Rome. No army was strong enough to beat him, but St. Leo decided to take a chance and actually meet with him. Now, nobody knows exactly what was said when they met, but by the grace of God, St. Leo actually convinced Attila the Hun not to attack Rome. Next on our list is St. Louis of France. St. Louis became the King of France at the age of 12 and was renowned for his personal piety and his promotion of justice and reform. He established numerous hospitals and orphanages, promoted fair taxation, and supported the poor. A devout Catholic, he actually led the 7th and 8th Crusades in the Middle East until he fell ill and died in North Africa. Next on our list is St. Maria Goretti. St. Maria Goretti was a young girl who exemplified holiness and purity. At the age of 11, she was sexually assaulted by an older man. She was stabbed 14 times and left for dead, and although she was taken to a local hospital, she died of her injuries a couple of days later. What's interesting is that when she passed away, she actually died while forgiving her attacker. What's also interesting is that after her attacker was sentenced to prison, he says that she appeared to him in a dream and told him that she forgave him. He then dedicated the rest of his life to God. Next up is Saint Mark Ji Tianzhong. Saint Mark Ji Tianzhong was a doctor in China. At one point, he contracted some type of painful stomach ailment, so he treated himself with opium, which is a very common practice at the time. The good news is that he got some relief from the stomach ailment. The bad news is that he became addicted to opium. And even though he remained a devout Christian, he was Catholic for the rest of his life, he never overcame his drug addiction, no matter how hard he tried. He was ultimately martyred during the Boxer Rebellion, along with his entire family. And when he was martyred, he actually asked if he could be martyred last, so that none of his family members would have to die alone. Next on our list is Saint Maximilian Kolbe. Saint Maximilian Kolbe was a Catholic priest who was arrested by the Nazis during the Holocaust and sent to the famous concentration camp, Auschwitz. While he was there, a prisoner escaped one day, so the guards decided to execute 10 other prisoners as punishment. One of the prisoners begged for his life because he had a family. So, Saint Maximilian volunteered to take his place. Saint Maximilian was starved and tortured for a couple of weeks until he was finally executed by lethal injection. Next on our list is Saint Maximus the Confessor. Saint Maximus was a monk and is best known for defending the doctrine of the two wills of Jesus against a heresy called monothelitism, which said that Jesus only had one will. Saint Maximus was arrested and tortured for being a Christian, and even had one of his hands cut off and his tongue ripped out. He also wrote extensively on asceticism and theology, and some of his writings, including Ambigua and 4 Centuries on Charity, remain influential today. Next up is Saint Moses the Black. Saint Moses the Black was a slave when he was young, but got caught accused of stealing, and then became a notorious gang member on the streets. After a failed robbery attempt one day, he went into hiding in an Orthodox monastery, where he not only became a Christian, he became a monk and the abbot of the monastery. He then embraced a life of asceticism, humility, and leadership, but was ultimately martyred for the faith. Next up is Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was born into a life of wealth and privilege, but after his parents died when he was young, decided to spend the rest of his life giving his fortune away. As the Bishop of Myra, he was arrested for being a Christian, but was later released after Christianity was legalized in the Roman Empire, and he even later attended the Council of Nicaea, which I mentioned in the last video. One of the legends attributed to him says that on one occasion, he secretly gave money to a poor father so that the father's 3 daughters wouldn't have to go into a life of prostitution and slavery. This became the inspiration for the story of Santa Claus. Several miracles were attributed to him, including calming a storm, healings, and raising people from the dead. Next on our list is St. Nicholas II. St. Nicholas II was the Tsar of Russia from 1894 until the communists took over Russia in 1917. He was a devout Orthodox Christian and was known for his personal piety and for initiating the Hague Convention, which sought to address international disputes between countries peacefully instead of through war. Good idea. When the communists took over, he and his entire family were captured and eventually executed. Next on our list is St. Oscar Romero. St. Oscar Romero was a Catholic archbishop in El Salvador who was known for his courageous advocacy for the poor, human rights, and social justice. He delivered powerful homilies that denounced government corruption and the persecution of Christians. The problem was that the government didn't exactly like being criticized, so one day, while he was celebrating Mass, he was assassinated. Next on our list is St. Paisios of Mount Athos. St. Paisios was an Orthodox monk who joined the monastic community in Mount Athos in Greece and became known for his devotion to prayer and fasting, humility, and wisdom. Several miracles were attributed to him, including the ability to know the names, lives, and questions people who came to visit him had before he even met them. Next on our list is St. Patrick. St. Patrick was kidnapped by pirates and sold into slavery in Ireland at the age of 16. After he escaped from slavery after receiving a vision from God, he later became a missionary and returned to Ireland to evangelize the people there. Through tireless preaching, he converted many of them, using simple images like the shamrock to explain the Trinity. Several miracles were attributed to him, including providing food for starving sailors, and raising people from the dead. Next up are Saints Perpetua and Saint Felicity. Saint Perpetua was a noble woman, and Saint Felicity was her servant, but they were more like friends instead of master and slave. They were both young women in their early 20s when they were arrested for being Christians. Perpetua had just had a baby, and Felicity was 8 months pregnant when they were arrested. After being held in captivity for a while, they were thrown into an arena to be killed by a wild bull. Felicity was killed, but Perpetua initially survived. A gladiator was instructed to walk over to Perpetua and finish her off, but he actually felt guilty and couldn't do it. When she saw that he was apprehensive, Perpetua took his hand and guided to slit her own throat. Next up is Saint Philaret of Moscow. Saint Philaret was an Orthodox bishop and theologian. He was known for his eloquence and piety, and he played a major role in a number of social and theological reforms during his lifetime. He also spearheaded the effort to translate the Bible into Russian, and he wrote the longer Catechism of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Next on our list is Saint Philomena. Saint Philomena was the daughter of a Greek king and became a Christian at a very young age. She was very beautiful and attracted a lot of older men who wanted to marry her, including the Roman emperor himself, Diocletian. If you're curious, she was 13 and he was almost 60. Anyway, she refused to marry him because she had taken a vow of chastity, so he had her arrested and tortured. She was whipped, shot with arrows, and tied to an anchor to be drowned. The good news is that she survived all of this. The bad news is that she was eventually beheaded and martyred for the faith. Next up is Saint Photius of Constantinople. Saint Photius was a brilliant theologian who defended Orthodox teaching against heresies, including papal supremacy and the Filioque. But he is probably best known for being the central figure in what is called the Photian Schism. Photius was the Patriarch of Constantinople, but his legitimacy was questioned by Pope Nicholas I, which caused him to be deposed but then later reinstated. This event highlighted the growing tensions between the East and the West and helped lay the groundwork for the Great Schism years later. Next up is St. Pio Petrolcini, more commonly known as Padre Pio. He was a Catholic friar who spent much of his life in confession, prayer, and pastoral care. He was known for his charitable deeds and extreme piety. And even though he later endured persecution in the form of slander, he never renounced his faith. Several miracles were attributed to him, including bilocation, healings, incorruptibility, mystical experiences, prophecies, and the stigmata. Next up is St. Polycarp. St. Polycarp was a disciple of the Apostle John and served as a bishop of Smyrna. He was arrested for being a Christian at the age of 86 and thrown into the Colosseum in Rome to die. The Romans first tried to burn him at the stake, but when they lit the flames, the fire formed a circle around him that gave him a heavenly glow. The Romans then stabbed him in the stomach, but when the blood came out of his belly, it put the fire out. The good news is that he initially survived all of this. The bad news is that he was eventually martyred for the faith. Next up is St. Seraphim of Sarov. St. Seraphim was an Orthodox monk who was known for his radiant joy, greeting people with, "Christ is risen, my joy." He taught that the true aim of the Christian life is to acquire the Holy Spirit, and this can only be done through prayer, fasting, and love. Several miracles were attributed to him, including healings, mystical experiences, and prophecies. Next on our list is St. Sophia. St. Sophia was a widow who had 3 daughters, Faith, Hope, and Charity, and they were all arrested for being Christians. After they refused to renounce their faith, the Romans killed all 3 of Sophia's daughters right in front of her. And guess how old they were? 12, 10, and 9. They were all tortured. 2 of them were beheaded, and 1 of them was thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil. After her daughters were martyred, Sophia buried them and for 3 days cried and begged God to let her join them. God answered her prayer, and she died beside their graves. Next up is St. Stephen of Hungary, the first king of Hungary. St. Stephen dedicated his kingdom to Christ and worked tirelessly to convert his people to Christianity. He built churches and required the government to be rooted in faith. He also wrote a collection of advice called Admonitions to his son Emmerich to instruct him on how to be a good king after him. Next on our list is St. Teresa of Avila. St. Teresa was a Catholic nun who spearheaded reform within her religious order, the Carmelites, calling her fellow nuns to come back to a life of poverty and prayer. Her writings, including The Interior Castle and The Way of Perfection, remain spiritual classics. Several miracles were attributed to her, including healings, levitation, and mystical experiences, including the famous transverberation, where an angel appeared to her and pierced her heart with divine love. Next up is St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. St. Teresa Benedicta was a Catholic nun, but before she was a nun, and even before she was a Christian, her name was Edith Stein. Edith Stein was Jewish and was originally from Germany. After spending several years as an atheist, she became a Christian in her early 30s, and then decided to go into monastic life. She got a PhD in philosophy and wrote extensively on spirituality, including books like Finite and Eternal Being and on the problem of empathy. She was eventually arrested by the Nazis for being Jewish and was sent to the famous concentration camp Auschwitz, where she was martyred. Next up is St. Teresa of Calcutta, more commonly known as Mother Teresa. St. Teresa felt a deep call to spirituality and to helping the poor from a very young age. She later became a Catholic nun and a missionary to India, where she founded the Missionaries of Charity. She and her fellow nuns spent the rest of their lives caring for the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, providing them with food, clothing, shelter, and other necessities. Next on our list is St. Theodora. The wife of Emperor Justinian I of the Byzantine Empire, St. Theodora was one of the most powerful women in history. She was a very strong-willed and politically savvy ruler who became her husband's most trusted advisor and in many ways co-ruled the empire. She is best known for restoring the veneration of icons and for her defense of women's rights. Next on our list is St. Therese of Lisieux. Nicknamed the Little Flower, St. Therese entered a convent to become a Catholic nun at the age of 15. Her life was simple, and she strongly believed that the best way to find God wasn't in greatness, but in small everyday acts of love like sweeping floors and washing dishes. When she died at 24, she wasn't very well known outside of her circle, but her autobiography, Story of a Soul, later spread like wildfire. In it, she describes her little way of holiness, doing small things with great love. Next up is St. Thomas Aquinas. Nicknamed the Angelic Doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas is one of the most brilliant theologians in the history of the Church. Originally destined for a life of nobility, he decided to take a different path and dedicated his life to God as a Catholic friar. He produced massive writings, most notably the Summa Theologica, where he showed how faith and reason work together. Aquinas' eloquence and razor-sharp intellect are second to none. Next up is St. Thomas of Becket. St. Thomas of Becket was a Catholic archbishop in England under King Henry II. King Henry started demanding that the church submit to the monarchy and, in effect, become a department of the state. Thomas refused and, you might say, became one of the first advocates for the separation of church and state. When King Henry tried to interfere in church matters anyway, Thomas criticized him, so some knights loyal to the king broke into Canterbury Cathedral and murdered him. Next up is St. Thomas More. St. Thomas More was a devout Catholic lawyer who is best known for refusing to accept King Henry VIII as head of the Church of England after he split from the Catholic Church. Thomas was arrested for treason and spent 15 months in prison before he was executed. His last words were, "I am the king's good servant, but God's first." Next on our list is St. Valentine. St. Valentine was a priest who secretly performed marriages in the Roman Empire. The Roman Emperor Claudius II had banned marriages for men who served in the military because he believed that single men made better soldiers. Valentine defied him and performed marriages anyway. He was eventually arrested, and according to legend, while he was in prison, he healed the blind daughter of his jailer, and a deep friendship soon blossomed between the two of them. Before he was ultimately martyred, he wrote a love letter to the young girl and signed it, "From your Valentine." Next on our list is St. Vincent de Paul. Nicknamed the Apostle of Charity, St. Vincent de Paul was a Catholic priest who dedicated his life to serving the poor and the sick. When he was young, he was captured by pirates and sold into slavery. He eventually escaped and returned to his native France and spent the rest of his life becoming known for his deep compassion, humility, and tireless efforts to reform the treatment of the poor. Next on our list is St. Vladimir the Great. St. Vladimir was the crown prince of an empire in Eastern Europe that was centered in modern-day Ukraine. In the year 988, he became a Christian and made his empire Christian as well. This was a huge event because it laid the groundwork for other countries in Eastern Europe, especially Russia, to also become Christian later on. Now, a funny legend associated with this event is that Vladimir was actually torn between converting to Christianity or Islam. And the reason he picked Christianity is because he liked to drink alcohol. Alcohol is a sin in Islam, but he could drink as a Christian. Before we conclude our talk about saints, I want to mention something very important here, specifically about martyrs. Martyrs are, of course, people who have died for the faith, and throughout church history, many of them are remembered not only as individuals, but as part of groups or alongside companions. For example, many martyrs have been killed alongside their family members and or fellow Christians in places like Armenia, China, Egypt, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Nigeria, North America, Russia, Uganda, and Vietnam. They're all important, obviously, but I want to kind of showcase a few of them here. First, one of the 21 Coptic martyrs of Libya. In 2015, 21 Coptic or Oriental Orthodox Christians, 20 from Egypt and 1 from Ghana, were beheaded by Muslim militants in Libya. They had been kidnapped a few months earlier, and despite being beaten and tortured, they refused to renounce their faith. In fact, one of them wasn't even a Christian when they were captured, but when he witnessed the faith of the others, he converted. Before they died, the last words on many of their lips were, Ya Rabbi Yasu, O my Lord Jesus. Number 2 are Anabaptist martyrs. During the Radical Reformation, many Christians began to reject infant baptism and came to believe only in believers' baptism, saying only that adults who make a profession of faith should be baptized. These Christians were nicknamed Anabaptists, and they eventually split into groups we now know today as Amish and Mennonites, among others. They were persecuted by Catholics and Protestants, and many of them were imprisoned, tortured, and or killed. One famous story I want to mention here of an Anabaptist martyr is that of a man named Dirk Willems, who had been arrested and imprisoned. He actually managed to escape, but a guard saw him and started chasing him. Willems ran across a frozen lake and made it, but when the guard tried to follow him, he fell through the ice. Check this out. Willems actually ran back and saved the guard who was chasing him from drowning. The guard wanted to let him go, but the other authorities made him bring him back to prison. Willems was later burned at the stake. The next group are French Revolution martyrs. During the French Revolution, a wave of discontent was sweeping over the country as commoners, hungry and oppressed, decided to finally rise up against the establishment, which included the government and the church. The Catholic monarchy was overthrown, clergy members were arrested, churches were destroyed, and Christian references were removed from the calendar. Thousands of Catholics and Protestants were persecuted, and many of them were beheaded by guillotine. On one particular occasion, 16 Catholic nuns were guillotined, and as they were being led to their deaths, they started singing hymns. According to eyewitnesses, the mob that had assembled to jeer at them went totally silent when they heard them singing. The next group are the Huguenot martyrs. This is another one that happened in France. Huguenots was a derogatory name given to Protestants who lived in France. During the wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants after the Reformation, tens of thousands of Huguenots were executed for refusing to convert to Catholicism. Arguably the most famous or most infamous incident was known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572. Now this deserves a video all by itself, and one of these days I may do one. But suffice it to say that there were thousands of Huguenots were brutally killed over the next several weeks, and those who survived fled to neighboring countries and beyond. The next group are the Marian martyrs. In 1534, the British Parliament had passed the Act of Supremacy, which created the Church of England, or Anglican Church, under King Henry VIII, and had severed ties with the Catholic Church. However, in 1553, Henry's daughter, Mary I, or Bloody Mary, became queen, and as a devout Catholic, she attempted to re-establish Catholicism as the dominant religion. To this end, she had Protestants arrested, imprisoned, and or killed. In fact, almost 300 leading Protestant figures were killed, many of whom were burned at the stake. What's interesting is that not only did Queen Mary not restore Catholicism, her persecution actually had the opposite effect and created a very strong anti-Catholic sentiment in Great Britain for many years to come. The next group are the Sebaste martyrs. In the year 320, a group of 40 Roman soldiers were accused of being Christians. After they were accused of being Christians, they were arrested in order to make a sacrifice to pagan gods. They refused to do so, so they were punished by being stripped naked and forced to stand in a frozen lake for an entire night. What's interesting is that one of the guards who was torturing them actually became amazed at their faith, so he took off his armor and joined them. After the night ended, some of the soldiers had died from hypothermia, and the ones who didn't were killed by the sword. So, there's a list of 38 more saints and several groups and companions of saints every Christian should know. In fact, if you combine this video with the last one, that's 75 saints total every Christian should know, along with a few groups and companions of martyrs. And like I said in the last video, I know that these are only very brief descriptions which don't do them justice, but hopefully it whets your appetite to look into them more. The saints are not distant legends from the past. They are the beating heart of Christian history, the living proof that holiness is possible in each and every age. Every saint, in their own time and place, answered God's call with courage, humility, and love. Some gave their lives in martyrdom, some in prayer, some in service, some in suffering. But they all reflected the same light, the light of Christ shining in a dark world. As we honor them, we are invited not just to admire them, but to imitate them, to take up our own cross, follow Christ, and let His grace make us holy. For every saint was once a sinner who chose to say yes to God. I hope you enjoyed this because that's all I got for now. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Stay faithful, stay devoted, and stay convinced of Christianity.